it's really
Sorry. Seriously. I don't know what to do with it.
Still grieve,
Good evening, and welcome to the January 2nd, 2018 Board of Directors meeting, and Happy New Year to everyone. We have a pretty full agenda tonight, so I'm going to just dig right into it. I hope everyone had a wonderful New Year. And so with that, I would take a motion with respect to the minutes for December 18th, 2017 meeting. Please remember that if you're going to vote on it, you're going to have attended that meeting. So is there a motion to accept the minutes as presented?
I move to approve the minutes of the Board of Directors meeting held on December 18th, 2017.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All in favor? Anyone opposed? Turning next to recognitions. Do we have any recognitions this evening? So presentations. The first one, we look forward to hearing our annual request, which is always exciting, for Kim for the French exchange trip request. Yep.
So we actually don't really have a formal presentation to make. We
Okay.
figured we would allow you to ask questions if you, obviously, ask questions if you have them, and answer them for you. We're presenting now we're presenting to you for the third time.
Right.
So are there any questions as to what successes we've had?
Yeah,
or-
why don't you just from a really high, because we have a relatively, some new board members who might not, I don't know if this is loud, who might
No, this is actually it was just.
not be as familiar with the field trip request. So do you want to just give a high level of what it entails, I know you gave great materials, thank you, but what your objectives have been, what you've sort of learned from next year, tweaks, all the good things.
Well, I'll start with the really good things. This started back in the fall of 2012 when Kim and I received an email, cold, asking if we'd be interested in doing this. We asked Dan. He said, go for it. So we did. 2 years later, we had our first exchange. It was very successful, except for the weather, and we have no control over that. Wonderful group of kids came. We went back to Bar, were warmly received. It was a wonderful exchange, and that set us well on the path for a very successful second one.
Sure. The second one was, again, hosting in October. We hosted 20 students in October of 2016, and then we stayed with those same 20 families in spring of 2017 for 2 weeks at a time. So they would come for 2 weeks here, and we would go stay with them for about 2 weeks total time there.
And so now we're ready for number 3.
Is there anything that you tweaked or made adjustments to just from your own learning experience in your prior years?
I think the one thing that we did after the first trip was to change our visit to Paris. On our first trip, we started in Bar and ended in Paris. And what we discovered was that our students were very confident at that point in time, so that we had not really problems. So if we would say stay here, that here meant to them within 200 or 300 feet of here. We meant here. Okay. So the second time around, we decided to do Paris first and then Bar.
Oh,
So
okay.
that's our big tweak.
Well, kudos to that tweak and that observation. It's pretty exciting.
It is very
You
exciting.
got to go grab a baguette. And is there any other questions or comments?
I guess I just had a question about a third adult supervisor is requested. Is that something that's being requested by the board or something that you folks are looking for, or?
So we have, we traveled with a third adult last time, and it It really makes the most sense with 20 students.
Yeah.
It's usually about a 6-to-1 ratio for most tour companies. And so if something were to happen and one of us has to go with a student for any kind of care or anything like that, that other one adult with 19 other students, it's nice to have the offset of one other adult, the two adults staying with a group while one other adult goes to take care of things. So the $1,000 stipend is to offset the travel costs, because that third adult will have to pay their full travel costs. So while they are working for the entire 2 weeks, they do still have to pay. We're hoping to keep it around the same price as last time, which was around $2,600, like under
Under
$2,600 and $2,800.
Okay.
So
And so you have somebody who's going to fulfill this, or you will have
We
somebody?
will find
That's
someone,
great.
yeah.
No, that's wonderful.
I think so far, we've only funded 2 stipends, correct? And you're asking for a third one this year?
the third was funded last time, because that was in our proposal last time as well.
Okay, great, thanks.
Any other thoughts?
Oh, I just have a question on, well, I had a question on the stipend, but I'm looking at the dates of the trip are the 13th to the 27th of April in 2019?
Yes.
Okay, so we're approving this over a year in advance?
Yes, the reason for that is that they will be here in the fall
Yeah.
of this coming October, and we need, of course, our students need to start saving their money to go on the trip in that following spring. The pattern is always October, they come, spring, we go.
We're signing students up now. So
Going
we
to be,
wanted
that's great.
we wanted to have your approval before we started signing
So
students up.
you're also going this spring?
No,
No.
Oh, okay,
I
so
think
it's
it's
just
like kids
every
come, is
Okay,
it kids
thank
come
you.
to us, so you have to have sort of the exchange relationship in play. So
Right.
year
Yes.
1, 2018, will be the host.
Yeah.
right.
Our true goal is to have our students signed up within the next month, let's say, because I believe in Bar, they're probably already waiting for us. And that way we get the students paired up, they start talking with each other, and they feel like they know each other when they arrive here in the fall. And again, when we go there in the spring, it's a very established relationship.
So we really need to have all of those matches made by
Right.
May at the very latest.
Yeah.
April, so that, it really does, it takes a little bit longer than just a tour trip
Yeah.
to get organized.
And can we talk about the stipend one more time? Because we approved for 2 stipends, correct? $1,000 apiece?
Yes.
And
So
then,
That
That was the
i-
first time.
right.
That's an ongoing stipend yearly. We work the year before for
Yeah.
the year of the
Trip.
exchange. The third is just a one-time $1,000 to offset the travel costs, because they are working for 2 weeks, providing security for all of our students.
For the third.
For the third adult. So it's just to offset the travel costs. They're still going to have to put in maybe, $1,600, $2,000 of their own money for that trip. So it's just it's to offset that.
And is that consistent with what our other trips do?
We're the only one
Yeah,
doing this right now, so
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
The 2-week?
We don't have, I
Right.
mean, we haven't established
Yeah.
protocol
Right.
in the past for that,
Right.
I don't believe, since
No.
we're the only exchange program that
Yeah,
exists.
this is the only educational exchange that we do. I have my Quebec trip in the spring, and that one is just a weekend, so the price is much different. And the parents that go as chaperones always pay their own way.
Okay, so really what
But
we're
it's ground transportation, and it's 3 days as opposed to 2 weeks.
Correct. So there is a difference between some of the trips,
Yes.
just again for the board and also
Yes.
for the community. There's a difference between an exchange program that's of this length of time as opposed to a trip that's, like a school
There-
Absolutely.
sponsored trip.
There is, yes, there is definitely a difference, but I think it's important to note that if a tour trip is going, that company pays for one adult for every 6 students. So if you have 20 students going, that company is paying for 3.5
Correct, and
adults.
those end up
And-
going into the costs that the students are paying for the trip.
Yes. So, I mean, like those kind of trips, there are those adults that go for free for chaperoning.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that, I mean, when you say the incidents that if someone,
Yes.
you need individualized attention, it's a lot of kids. I mean, so the question of having a third or not, just to me, it seems pretty self-evident.
It's a safety
Yeah.
issue.
And so I guess then, is there any problem, and I just don't know this, so this is not unique to you. Are we able to agree to something that's in a budget year, 1 year in advance? You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, we can agree to anything, but it's, but I think it's, it
You know what I'm
really
saying? It has
yeah.
nothing to do with this. It just, in
We're
terms
just
of being
writing
able to
down,
vote on
agree to
a
anything.
non-budget year
Yeah, there's,
item.
You're just so efficient, you're way ahead.
It's,
I understand why you're
it
doing
would
it.
have to, obviously, it would be with all the other budget items and all the other budgeted stipends that we pay and so forth.
Okay.
And, everything's dependent on the budget passing.
Right, so we just
Okay,
we dog
so
ear it for them.
Doesn't matter what it is, everything's dependent on that, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so, but it makes sense. So what you're doing is you're able to confidently say to our French cohorts,
We're
you come here, but we're coming
Right.
to you.
Approved.
It starts it all, the mechanism
Yes.
going. Kevin?
Yeah, so since we've gone budget early, could you help me out with some of the things that talk about the impact of what this has meant for the students who have gone, and what you would anticipate for the next group, to kind of bring it back to the value on their education?
We should have brought our videos.
Yes, we actually have a video that we showed our students just a week ago, that some of our students who went in the past 2 trips talked about the experience for them, and overwhelmingly it was just do it. They said the most important lesson they learned was seeing through other eyes. You don't really realize until you travel to another country and live with a new family, live in a different culture, go to a school that's not yours, that there is at least one other side to the world. There actually are very many, but you really see everything through different eyes. They really do come back changed for the better.
That's great.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Yes.
Are there any other comments or thoughts on this?
I had only one other thing about Karen's question about exchange. We do have one other exchange, but it's not at the high school in the district. So we'll have one exchange at the high school, which is the French one that the board has approved. And then we have the Japan exchange, which is more of a regional exchange now with Yarmouth. We're trying to recall if we fund another adult, but that's more handled through that organization that
They
takes
don't
care of
fund-
that.
yeah, No,
So
we
I
don't.
just wanted to clarify.
I don't believe we fund anything for that anymore, Jeff.
Right, I'm pretty sure we don't.
Okay, are there any other comments? Would someone like to make a motion with respect to the request?
I move that we approve the French exchange trip as requested.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there additional comments? All in favor? Anyone opposed? Okey dokey. Good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job. I know how much the kids love it, so.
That's awesome.
Okay, with that, our next presentation is for Greeley High School Proficiency Update with Dan and Sally.
Good evening, everybody. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
It's great to see all the kids back in school today, well-rested. Teachers, too. Give me a minute here as I get set up. That's good news. I'm connected to the internet. All right. So, thank you for the opportunity to come chat with you folks this evening about the work we've been doing at Greeley High School this year as it relates to proficiency. And why am I not moving? There we go. What I'm hoping to do this evening is share the progress that we have made on the proficiency, more specifically the grading practices that go along with that. I'm hoping that we'll have the opportunity to explain the challenges that go along with that, and certainly identify any next steps. And Sally and I are going to share that with you, and at the end, there'll be an opportunity for you folks to ask questions. I will apologize ahead of time for any educational jargon that I use or acronyms. We know that everything we do in this profession is very rich with that. So at any rate, about a year ago, maybe a little bit longer, our instructional leadership team at the high school started to put together a teacher grading guide as it relates to proficiency. And probably the important piece to share with you as it relates to this slide is that really, as a district, we're dealing with two different types of grading systems. We decided as a district that we're going to take that middle-of-the-road approach and understand that when you do that, you're dealing with two different types of grading systems that philosophically are different. So as it relates to our graduation progress in terms of credit, we're looking more on the 0 through 100 grading side of the fence, and then as you look towards things like habits of work, guiding principles, and progress on graduation standards, you're looking at grading more on that 1 through 4 scale. Okay. In terms of the work that the teachers were specifically doing at the classroom level, I thought this might be helpful to you by providing you with a couple of lenses to look at this through. Meaning, as we were developing these grading practices, many of them we initially started talking about them being school-wide practices, and as we began to learn more and develop our practices around that, we realized that it made sense to be consistent by course. And when I say consistent by course, what that means is as you move from one Algebra 1 class to the next, the grading practices are going to be very similar. As you move from one English 10 class to the next, the grading practices are going to be very similar. If you look at the Algebra 1 class and the English 10 class, they're not going to be as similar. Okay, so I was hoping that that might be helpful to you in terms of giving you at least one lens to look through in terms of the work that we've been doing. And then the second item there is we whittled this down in a couple different ways, but when it came to the guidance that we're giving teachers in the grading guide, we focused a lot more on the progress towards graduation standards, okay? And to give you an example what that means, there's a lot of different things that we do in the school in terms of course offerings and curriculum. And courses like Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry, English 9, English 10, those are the core courses that we offer, and that's where the bulk of our graduation standards are met and taught and assessed. But if you think about what we have in terms of course offerings, we offer a full slate of IB courses and AP courses, and those are really, in a lot of cases, beyond the scope of the graduation standards. So again, as you're thinking about grading practices and consistency around grading practices, we really tried to help teachers focus on the graduation standards and the courses that contain those. So again, you're going to see less similar grading practices as you move out of those core courses. Okay. If I drill down a little bit further, when we developed this grading guide, we gave teachers additional guidance on things like habits of work, and by and large, I think you guys are familiar with that. We started providing students with feedback on habits of work last year as a school, and then as the year went on, we refined that, and this year we've become a lot more consistent in terms of how we report that and in terms of how we have conversation with kids about that. The second bullet that you see there, formative and summative assessments, I'm going to come back to that in a minute, but suffice it to say, that was one of the areas we started looking at more in a school-wide perspective, and as things evolved, that changed a little bit. And then if you look at the last three bullets there, what might help you with that is, again, I would take you back to the previous slide where we talked about being consistent by course. So again, in your Algebra 1 courses, you're going to see consistent practices, more consistent practices certainly, with late work reassessments and zeros. They might not be identical to what you're seeing in an English 10 class. Okay. Another piece that might help you put this in perspective, thinking about what we're reporting on as a school. The end of quarter report card, that's certainly what we used to call it. There's a number of components to that right now. At the end of the first quarter, when all the grading is complete, what the paper copy that goes home with our kids, the cover sheet or the initial sheet is not very different than what you've seen in the past, meaning thinking about the transcript and how that's reported. It's reported by course, by quarter, and it has a 0 through 100 grade on there. It also lists GPA, it lists total credits earned. The only difference on that particular sheet this year as compared to years last, I think Jeff had mentioned this at an earlier meeting, is that at the bottom we put a little note that said in the fall of 2017, Greeley High School has revised their grading practice. It's just, that's a kind of a point in time we want to make sure that people were aware of as they looked at these documents. The second part of the report card that went home at the end of the first quarter, we listed our habits of work standards. So every teacher reported on the habits of work, the 4 habits of work of standards. So that's reported by standard, by course, by quarter. And then very similarly, the graduation standards. Any graduation standard that was measured in that particular course was reported as a third component of our report. And it certainly was not all the graduation standards. That would be a lot of paper. What shows up is any graduation standard that was measured over the course of that particular quarter. So if there was a grade attached to a graduation standard, it's going to show up underneath that particular course, underneath that particular quarter. And just as an aside, all of this information is available on PowerSchool. If you look at your PowerSchool, you see the 0 through 100 grade, and you click on that, and you can drill down, and you can get the same information on that. Okay? So as we began to work with this grading guide, and we're working our way through the quarter, and the teachers are spending a lot of time with this and thinking about how to implement a lot of these changes in the classroom. What we did is we took a look at the work that we've been doing and the revisions we've been trying to make, and asked ourselves this question: does this represent a fair grade based on our knowledge of the student and their work thus far? And what that did is it provided teachers with a perspective in terms of building the grade for the first quarter, or providing student feedback at the end of the first quarter. So what are some of the things that we did? Well, based on the feedback that we were getting from teachers, and we had a lot of different meetings. We met as departments, we met as our instructional leadership team. Really the first 2 pieces right there, as I mentioned earlier, we started off by talking about them more on a school-wide basis, and we realized as we began to have these discussions and work through the grading practices that maybe it made some sense to make some revisions to those and maybe even make them more applicable by course. Some of the confusing pieces that came along with that, or some of the challenging pieces that came along with that, rather, were the weighting associated with formative and summative assessments. For example, we started off with a very prescribed weighting. So we're saying, okay, your first quarter grade should be made up of approximately 25% formative assessments and 75% summative assessments. And as the more we learn, that really didn't necessarily fit and what we were doing and give our kids the best feedback as we were winding down the quarter. We also wanted to be thinking more about how we define those formative and summative assessments, and forced us to rethink, okay, is this really a formative assessment, or can we better define that this is a summative? What are we measuring? What are we trying to do with this assessment? So a lot of those great conversations, a lot of that great learning went on with teachers, and we provided them with the opportunity to use their professional judgment and make some revisions as it related to that. The third piece right there, when we talked about the standards that we're counting in that final course grade, we were receiving some feedback from teachers on occasion that were saying, listen, I measured this standard, but maybe I didn't give it the attention that it deserved, and maybe that doesn't make sense to make that count as part of the first quarter grade or count as strongly in the first quarter grade as it should. So we allowed them to pull that particular standard out of the measurement in the first quarter, with the understanding certainly they're going to be measuring it going forward multiple times. And then the last piece right there, when we talk about our grading crosswalk, for those of you who aren't familiar, we have a crosswalk that allows us to convert the 0 through 100 grades to the 1 through 4 grades. And again, we provided teachers with some opportunities to really use their professional judgment and if that was meeting the needs of them and their students. Okay? So, as we concluded the first quarter, the good news is that the opportunities and the feedback and the revisions that we provided teachers with the opportunity for really came back to us in the feedback that we continued to receive. Meaning we met with a number of teachers. I met with 20 to 30 students and just, we talked it through and said, okay, in the first quarter, what worked, what didn't work, what were some of the challenging things, what are some things that maybe we should do a better job with going forward. And we got a lot of good feedback. And again, that information really confirmed a lot of what we had already done, which was good news. It tells us we weren't going down the wrong road. Probably the last one there is certainly worth mentioning as well. That is something we heard multiple times. And a big part of that was students and teachers really learning at the same time in terms of the revisions and the changes that we were making in our grading system. So how do we do a better job communicating with our parents? How do we do a better job communicating with our students about, okay, this is a formative assessment, this is a summative assessment, why, how much is this counting towards the end of quarter grade? Here's the feedback that I'm giving you on your learning. Where does that fit into all of this? Okay. So as we continue to move forward, the things that we're thinking about, the things that we're doing, continuing to get this cycle of feedback. We have a school leadership team and our instructional leadership team that meets regularly. Our departments meet regularly. We're able to, really take a look at the work that we're doing and continue to make the appropriate revisions. I recently had a request from our student government advisor, Andy Tereff, if we could actually have student participation on our instructional leadership team, and I think that makes sense as we go forward. Certainly when we have discussions like this, getting that kind of feedback. We will be sending out a mid-year survey to our staff, so it's going to give us more feedback and more information about some of the things that we want to be thinking about and looking at as we move forward. And then the last piece there, I think, was one of our bigger learnings. I think initially we had thought this was more of a shorter timeline in terms of implementation. And what I think we're learning is that this isn't something that's going to happen in a matter of months. This is something that's going to be an ongoing look and an ongoing revision and something we're going to have to pay attention to, not for months, but for years until we have this really where we want it. And there's a lot of good information out there that tells us that's the kind of pace that should be going on when you're making significant changes.
Habits of work example.
Habits of work example. Tell me more.
I was just, that we've already learned that when we implement the habits of work consistently for a year, our teachers got it.
Yeah. She said it.
Sorry. Yeah. So I just wanted to speak to what I've learned from this, which is when we have the focus and the time and the attention, our staff works well together and we solve these problems. And that timeline takes the time it takes for staff to work together on things. And one of the reflections I had was that the high school last year spent the year focusing on a consistent understanding of how to talk about habits of work separately. And we are seeing the strength of that emphasis this year. And so I think part of what I understood from working with Dan on how did this happen and what can we do better is to remember that when we focus on something and do it well, we then own that as a building. And so I hoped you would hear that we have confidence that as we pick one area of emphasis at a time and work together as a staff, we will make these grading practices and reporting practices consistent and of the value that we're working toward. It's just we kind of bite off one at a time.
Gotcha. Thanks. Okay, and that feeds in right in what you were saying. So certainly as we look forward, we're looking to be more consistent, not only within courses, but growing that outward, school-wide where appropriate, as we try to align with a proficiency system. And the second item there is important to mention again. Granted, we have taken on the challenge of going down the middle of the road when you're dealing with two different systems. Fundamentally, they're different, and our teachers have done a tremendous amount of work navigating that and trying to figure that out and trying to figure out what that means to us as a school and continuing to support our kids in their learning. In terms of RTI, as our instruction and our assessment change, the supports that we have in place, we need to keep an eye on that and make sure that those continue to do what we need them to do. As we deal with additional initiatives, one of the big roles certainly that I have is to continually keep my eyes open for overlap so we don't reinvent the wheel, so we don't have things in separate buckets that don't need to be. For example, as you know, we're dealing with a NEAS self-study this year. There's 7 NEAS standards. If you take a look at those standards, you're going to see that there's a lot of crossover between the NEAS standards and the work that we're doing on proficiency. So rather than having them as separate buckets, we try to get that twofer, so to speak. The other piece that's important to note is we're really only in the second year of implementation of a new Bell schedule. If you folks remember, it was just the previous school year that we moved from what had been 50-minute instructional periods to 82, 83-minute instructional periods. And that changes the way teachers teach, and that changes the way we assess, changes the way we do things, a lot of things at school. So as we work through this proficiency transition, it's important to keep an eye on those as well. And then the last piece that I wanted to talk about was the transcript. Sally may have mentioned to you folks before, at one point the state had Chapter 134 in place, and that dictated a lot of the information and the how-tos around proficiency in schools. That's not there anymore. We're still waiting to hear from the state in terms of what their guidance is going to be on that. And I think once we get that information, it's going to be a little clearer in terms of a lot of this other work that I've described to you, but also, what ultimately appears on our students' transcripts as well. So that was my not so quick summary of the work that we're doing. I'm going to hand this over to Sally. She's got some things to share with you as well.
And I don't mind if we do this part after your questions. It's not a memory trick for you or Dan.
Yeah, why don't we just see if anyone has any thoughts or questions after, thank you, Dan, after listening to Dan. I was going to say,
I try to let the opportunity go down that end, but
I was like, yes, Karen.
yeah, I know. Well, I feel it's important to acknowledge the length of time that it's taken, for the district as a whole, certainly led by Sally, but also by Dan and a number of staff through the proficiency group to even get us to this point. So I think that, applying for the waiver initially, and then, moving forward with a proficiency-based diploma. I think that was a 3-year process, and having the proficiency group that met all through, the school year as well as summers. I think there really just needs to be a little bit of acknowledgement that the district has invested a significant amount of time. And as a board member, the parts that I was able to be involved with, whether it be the curriculum committee, the proficiency committee, it was clear that the staff were invested in it, the administration was invested in it. So I just think that it's also, we have to acknowledge that everything that we developed, or that the district developed, was a theory or in practice. It was supposed to work this way in practice. And so similar to the habits of work, which we were able to pilot, this, rolling something out and expecting it to come around, it would have been very nice if it had just all gone as it looked on paper. Grading, the grading handout that everyone just, followed along, and there weren't any tweaks that needed to be made. So I appreciate that that isn't what happened. And when that doesn't happen, I do appreciate that you took the time, Dan, to meet with staff to say, whoa, this didn't come across potentially after the first quarter. Let's take a look and stop right here and examine it. So for me, I feel fortunate that the district didn't just push through, and I think it's in the best interest of the students that you took the time, that you met with individual teachers as well as so many individual students, because I know that it is the students' grades, and it's incredibly important to students what their GPA is and what their quarterly grades are. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for involving the students going forward, because that's a voice that we had always brought in a lot, but again, until the practice is put into play, it's actually on the ground happening, it's hard to see how it impacts and affects students. And they are the ones that are impacted. So I think it's very important, and I would continue to support that you keep that student voice as much as possible with your staff. And to Sally and your point, it's the consistency for me, and I think for the board, it's the consistency that is so important, that we have to be consistent across subjects, and then we be consistent across, a student should know, it doesn't matter if you've taken this math class or this English class or this social studies class, that, what does it mean if an assignment's late? How are zeros being handled? This should be clear and consistent. So that's a very worthwhile goal. I'm glad that that's the number one thing that we're approaching. But I do think that it looked like we were putting in all the effort up front, and I know we did put in the effort up front. But thank you for saying, whoa, it didn't come out quite the way it was intended.
I would just like to say that I think our strongest consistency will be a commitment to adequate evidence of student proficiency.
Yep.
And the reason why I would really stand on that place is because in some cases, there's going to be students working on similar standards over multiple years, like the language standards or the English standards. In other cases, the standards are addressed through the students taking 1-year course at Greeley High School in visual and performing arts, and they can meet all of their visual and performing arts standards. So in some cases, adequate evidence happens in 1 year. Some cases it happens multiple years, and the design has to be whatever serves the evidence necessary for that standard. But it's really irritating for kids and parents because, well, sometimes you're going to get another shot at it. Sometimes you're going to be doing this multiple times. Other times there's a retake opportunity because this is a core summative assessment for this core course, and we will not be addressing it again. And so the one commitment I can make is that as with the state's guidance, which we don't have yet, we will be very serious about what is adequate and sufficient evidence that a reasonable person would need to say students have met these standards. But what's really hard, and we learned it from taking apart the Casco Bay Family Grading Guide, was that sometimes it's a lot of shots. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you get a retake or an opportunity to take that same assessment in a different form again right now. Other times it's we're going to address it again in the spring, and you'll have another opportunity in the spring.
And I do think that's an excellent point, because I do think that you can take a word like retake or, and people think it's a lot grayer. It's not as black and white as I think initially some of us, and including myself, were thinking. It sounds like, and the same thing with having multiple ways to show that you achieve the standard. Well, that's confusing. And so I think in some ways, well, did this person meet in a written way? Did this person meet the standard in an oral way? So, I appreciate that it's not as black and white. We can't say something like, retakes will be available or reassessments will be available. And does that mean for absolutely everything? So, again, those are the decisions that I'm glad that we are being open-minded enough to use common sense and not trying to set a rigid set of systems that don't provide that type of flexibility.
And I would just add that it's not till our teachers start comparing notes across departments that they discovered some of these really unique differences about how their standards are taught and assessed and what kind of progression, because you think everyone's just like you. I would just like to point to these next two slides,
You know
but
what, I
not
just have
explain
one
them.
question.
Oh, sorry.
I have, Mike, had a
Sorry.
No,
question.
first, I just wanted to say, first of all, as a new board member, thank you for presenting this over and over to us and communicating this to us. It's taken multiple beatings for me to understand this, and so thank you for providing that. But one thing I just wanted to, in terms of communication, that as a parent of a new high schooler, I've experienced the parent-teacher conference here for the first time, and I didn't get any feedback from the teachers about proficiency and how my student was doing in that regard. So I think that perhaps that was a missed opportunity. Maybe my experience was different than others, but perhaps that might be an opportunity for teachers to really get involved in communicating the proficiency for their courses to the parents involved. So I just wanted to offer that up as a suggestion.
Thank you, and if we had the chance, I'd like to learn more about that and what that means and how we could better help folks understand what we're doing. So.
Sure.
Mike, did you have something to say?
Oh, ma'am.
You had the poised look. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you. We can move on to the next slide.
Okay, all I wanted to do here was kind of take a look back, and here's what I have in these two slides. I have some of the elements of what we know about the implementation, or what are the systems involved in a proficiency-based learning system, and what we've been doing over the last couple years to get ready. Because I think one of the things we know is that, just to Mike's point, our teachers were not fully prepared to speak to this authoritatively, and they didn't have enough experience to feel confident that how they interpreted the grading guide or what they were doing was the right thing to do. And I wanted to point to what I see as the communication challenge between my role and Dan's role, and kind of where we are now, is that if you look at this first column, this is the first thing we were trained, is that the way proficiency, the way school systems would make this monumental change to go from a traditional approach to learning to a learning outcome approach to learning was by working on policy, practice, and public engagement simultaneously, which seems kind of challenging to be engaging the public when you yourself aren't quite sure of the practices. But we started that, and in the first year of our 3-year extension, these are the 3 years that we had prior to this year with our freshmen. In our first year, and this is all the plan that we submitted to the state and was seen as an orderly process, in the first year, we had a district proficiency committee, and the committee had board members, teachers, and administrators, and district administrators from the middle school and high school level. And in the first year, the proficiency leadership team helped author the plan that we submitted to the state for the extension and began working this public engagement community part. How do we talk about proficiency as we're learning about it? And we started with the high school talking points, because the high school teachers, the high school faculty themselves had done a nice organizing, orienting place to say, this is what's already good about Greeley High School, and this is how we view proficiency, as we were working with a document over in the third column called the Proficiency-Based Learning. There are 10 principles that really drive this approach. So the first year of the Proficiency Committee, we really focused on understanding proficiency from the high school teacher's point of view and talking about where the big ideas. In the second year of the Proficiency Committee, this is where I would say that I learned a lot about drift. Our job, the task of this committee, this stakeholder group committee, was to set the direction and talk about the big idea talking points for how we wanted our proficiency system to look. And we felt, I mean, I'm embarrassed to be looking at my high school colleagues right now, we felt totally authorized to do that. And I'm looking at some board members that were part of that proficiency leadership committee. We felt that it was our job to set the direction for the district, and we created those big ideas talking points. And I'm looking at people thanking you for your service. In the following year, that's when Jeff and I worked to take that to be the proficiency primer and shared that presentation in a number of venues, thinking that would help communicate the plan, right? We thought we had a lovely plan. And the next column over is the response to intervention or the need. You always have to have a support system. We were working on that support system over the last 3 years. And in another column, all the way over to the right, all of this hinges back to Mike's point about communication. The teachers themselves need to not just hear about it, but to be talking about these practices and learning together these practices. So in the first year, we brought on the Great Schools Partnership Coach, and we really worked with the proficiency-based learning principles. And in the next couple years, we talked about how does one plan curriculum using these principles. We talked about a understanding by design or backward design process that would lead to assessments. We, in the third year, we were working through a new leadership model. But we thought we were bringing everybody along, and we were the it, right? At the same time, there's even other elements to proficiency that were being developed at the same time as we had this wonderful proficiency committee thinking it's leading the charge, right? We also had what we know proficiency learning to look like. You have to start with clear learning outcomes. So our work over the last 3 years was to present and define the graduation outcomes that would stand for Greeley High School proficiency to our board curriculum committee. And many of the subject areas, there are 8, were able to accomplish that task in the first year. In the second year, we brought along visual and performing arts. And in the third year, we had the science standards readdressed, and we also did the career and education development standards. But we were working backwards, going, let's be really clear what our standards are and what those outcomes are that are essential at Greeley for proficiency, because there's a lot of other things we teach in science, et cetera. In the assessment column, we were working with those proficiency-based learning practices. We then, and let's just to go back in time, as we had talked about, we want to be a middle-of-the-road district. We looked at our colleagues who had already met the state standard for having a system in Falmouth and Yarmouth. And so it was very clear from Yarmouth's model that it was a few major summative or assessments, evaluative assessments, assessing not for the purpose of figuring out what to do next, but for the purpose of that snapshot certifying students' level of knowledge. And so we started saying, we're using that model, we'll be focusing on those core courses for graduation, and in those core courses, what will be those core summative assessments. And that has been our primary focus for the last couple years. It really didn't extend out to all summative assessments at the high school. It really was quite a narrow focus to begin with. And then in the third column, grading and reporting, as Jeff says, always comes last. As you're kind of picking up the pieces, and I appreciated in sharing this with Jeff, you start with the public engagement and you end with the grading and reporting. Those are both very, very important public pieces. The middle school and high school worked together for the last few years. And another piece of confidence and faith I have is that when the middle school and the high school worked together on what we called a crosswalk, it was supposed to be a one-way street. If you're here with traditional grading, this is what it would mean in a proficiency setting. It doesn't work the same way to start in proficiency and bring it over to traditional grading. It's just not a good idea. But we worked together with the middle school on what our practices would be and how we would view these systems. And then take you to the 16-17 school year. The middle school jumped right into piloting standards-based grading whole hog, where the high school focused last year on piloting habits of work. One of the pieces of confidence I have is that this year is our second year at Greeley Middle School for doing this kind of grading practices that Dan was sharing with you at the high school right now. And it is going well at the middle school. And like I say, last year the high school committed themselves to the habits of work, and this year you're into the standards-based grading in your core courses. And if I were going to name what I know to be some of the confusion, it's the high school focused on core courses, graduation requirements, at the exclusion of making requirements or directives for all the other subject areas or whatever else is being addressed. that grading guide, while it was helpful to everybody, was clearly guiding people around those core courses. The use of that grading guide, back to Mike's point about not all of our teachers feel comfortable
don't.
explaining where they fit in the proficiency model. Many of them are waiting to find out where they fit in the proficiency model because they are not in core courses, or it's not at one of those years where students are going to be showing the evidence that they are proficient, and it really hadn't been the focus to address for people in those roles exactly how they were be expected to do all of this. We really had a narrow focus on English, math, science, and social studies, a focus on really the freshman class. Not that the other classes aren't important, but that's our first class. And so it was quite a narrow focus for really an important and broad initiative. So anyway, I just wanted to, that was my learning through all of this. And my big departure, my punchline, if I were going to share what I think is going on, it's that while the district thought that it had wrapped it up, set the direction, communicated it effectively, and where's the problem? Not everyone understood that the district's work was setting the direction. And frankly, what I hear as an issue, and I think it's a real issue, is that many, many teachers feel that the dual grading is burdensome. And they would just like to not do it, right? It'd be a whole lot easier to approach this problem with a singular focus. And what they're being asked to do is hard for them. However, we didn't give the teachers the opportunity to hear from the parents. Because the teachers are concerned about doing something well. The parents are concerned about their students' transcript and their opportunities to go to college. And I think that the teachers didn't get to hear the parents going, we have a real fear here that you do this in a way that is supportive of us, right? And the teachers are over here saying, we're being asked to do 2 types of grading at the same time, which makes things really difficult. And if I had it to do over, I would have had more savvy to know that the communication needed to be more thorough and broad and widespread. I just think that I don't think our teachers shared this understanding.
To that end, can I ask you just factually, did you guys get a lot more feedback this grading cycle from parents than you usually do?
I will tell you that personally, I did not get a lot of feedback from parents. Certainly, I think that's in part because of the work that we did as we got towards the end of the quarter. Giving teachers some potential revisions and adjustments to how they were grading. I certainly got plenty of feedback from students when I asked.
That's actually, that was my experience too. It was the students, whether our student reps and or even at the strategic planning, the feedback and the struggling with the formative and summative.
Right.
Sort of like the not really knowing what their grade is until the end, and it is a complicated thing. The other thing is there any and this has probably existed for years, well before proficiency. How are you consistent within like that? Our Algebra 1 grading is the same as like a Falmouth or a Yarmouth Algebra 1 grading, or is that just irrelevant?
That's a little bit more challenging. I would.
But I don't even know if it's germane. I mean, I just
right. I would. Knowing exactly what the next school over is doing, there's certainly we can find out and ask, and they have similar grading guides, or a lot of schools do. I would tell you probably the pieces that they have most in common are the standards that they're targeting, and then how they measure from there. I'm sure that every school has their own nuances that go along with that.
It's so interesting that when we first started, just not subjective, because that makes it seem like it's ad hoc, but there is, when you listen to it, all the tweaking within our district, it just seems like I'm just always so intrigued about the lack of sort of guidance that you guys that everything's so internal in terms of trying to navigate what works for us and how it does, and then bringing the standards based in. But it just always seems very like the tweaking part, that it's happening throughout the state in different districts. It just seems so interesting to me.
I find that, just to juxtapose New Hampshire is doing competency-based learning as a state for quite a while now. New Hampshire has the same children we do, same teachers, we're the same region of the United States. New Hampshire, the state of New Hampshire was bemoaning the dropping of New Hampshire's performance score in math this fall. Okay, they are taking the Smarter Balanced Assessment, and statewide they had over 53% of their students proficient in math. You want to know what Maine's data is? Maine's data was cheering because we had like 42 or 43% of the students proficient. I think there clearly is a challenge where you're wasting your time, energy, friction, et cetera, when you are in a local control state, and each and every one of us is making the wheel.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, please.
I think this is a really good presentation. I know for me, I've been hearing about this for almost 3 years, and it's really starting to take shape. It's really starting, like for me, like my brain's starting to break it down and really understand it at a deeper level. I think it's really obvious that a lot of conversations and input is taking place, and it's coming from so many different areas. I think to think about, Dan, you sitting down with 30 to 40 students, that really means a lot to, I think it speaks to how invested we are in making this kind of unwieldy transition successful. And I think it's really it's about the kids, it's about best practices. So I think this was a really good, and I think, it seems like it's coming together. And I think we're not, because we've had, we've changed our course a few times, or, really rethought some things. I don't think that's unique to us. I think that's happening all over the state. So I think we should feel really good about where we're at. Thank you.
Yeah, and I do think to that end is that even though we're tweaking, not tweaking, we're adjusting, we're learning, the good news is that within one semester, or, one thing, that feedback, that loop is coming. And, sometimes there might be growing pains with it, but that at least the mechanism by which the feedback is coming to us, and we're being fairly responsive on a short order, because the stakes are high when it's your kid's transcript. So good. So thank you very much. Are there any other questions or comments? Kevin?
Sure, wish I could articulate this better, so help me out. I understand. I think that we all embrace proficiency. To the degree possible. It shows that somebody has mastery of that. So we continue to move through these iterations to get to the perfect model, and then the student goes to that next level of education. How does this align with the way they're evaluated in college? Are they? I would assume that it's not always proficiency-based. I would assume that they may not have multiple opportunities to show proficiency, that it may become more of an absolute. You know it or you don't know it without another chance. Does that set up people for a different type of expectation the next level?
I certainly think that one would believe there are vast differences between what we'll be doing here and where students will land in college. But I think the real hinge point for me is I was going to say transformation, and I should, the transformation of the role of the learner. Because proficiency isn't about, the number one thing about proficiency isn't do-overs. Right? The number one thing about proficiency is beginning with very clear learning outcomes and communicating those to students so that they can be more of an active learner in their learning. So I think, yes, Kevin, I don't know two colleges that are the same anyway. Sure. I do think that our students will be better prepared if we make them more active, where they are the people holding on to whatever the syllabus holds in college, and they are actively having those discussions about what is the evidence, what is the quality of the evidence you're seeking, and how will this be judged. Because whether they have the one shot or two shots, they need to know what they're going after.
And while it may have been or continues to be a challenge with the habits of work, I think that may be one of the strongest things that they can take with them to that next level, whether it is another educational opportunity or working someplace. But thank you for clarifying.
No, thank you for connecting the dots for me.
I'll be here all night.
Anything else? Okay.
The only thing I would add is that when Horace Mann invented public education almost 200 years ago now, the system that he and many others invented with him in the United States really lasted up until, in the state of Maine, up until the year 2012. And so I'm not trying to overstate it, but the system that we're trying to build and recreate in Maine, and it's not just this district, really tears apart or takes apart 200 years of history. And I think our teachers are trying to figure that out. We're trying to figure that out. We're all trying to figure that out. What does that mean? And different districts in Maine have taken different approaches. Some have taken a purist model of proficiency, which says kind of throw everything out and start over, and let's look at how students learn. We've taken the approach that our district has always been pretty strong academically, and that we want to retain a lot of those pieces, but insert some of the things that make sense in proficiency world, and that's where we've been. And in order to do that well, in order to take that middle of the road approach and blend the two, it takes time for our staff to work together to get to that point. And so these things do not get done overnight, and there's so many components to proficiency that have to be looked at and studied by our staff. And so it's a lot of work, and it's hard work. And our goal is to get to a place where our students are benefiting from the work that we've done, and we've already started to see some of that. But it takes a while, and it's, I have another foot in another district where my children go, and my daughter is in high school, and she's experiencing a lot of the same things that, students at this high school are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And she and I talk about retakes and different opportunities, and some of her teachers understand proficiency more than others. She'll even tell me which ones and what they say and her perception of that. And I think that's just part of the growing process of transforming a system that has been in place for so long. And in 2012, the state legislature decided that it was time to try something different. And that's what we're all doing, and I think it's a worthy cause. I just think it's a very difficult and challenging one, and sometimes it's more challenging than some of us expected at the beginning, because it is such a stark change in practice in some ways.
Anything else? Thank you very much. This was really helpful. I appreciate this.
Thank you, folks.
So, next we would have superintendent's report.
Happy New Year. Before the break, we had some middle school students who were very interested in, now that winter's here, in making some new bike racks for the middle school, and hopes that spring will be around the corner soon. So we'd like to thank students at Greeley Middle School, Adam Jacobson, Caleb Crocet, and Ray Woodcock for creating some new bike racks. And had a lot of guidance from our staff at the school, including our special education teacher, Derek Burrow. And I'd like to thank them for all of their hard work, and we'll be using them a lot this spring. The debate team at the high school has been involved in a lot of tournaments lately, and we'd like to just send a thanks out to these students. Zach Whiting jumped to the varsity level in the congressional debate at the Senate level. Grant Dresnock also recently joined him in serving as the presiding officer of the Senate and passed an amendment to bill up for debate. Additional honors go to students Ben Hall and Carson Bell, who took second and third place in the JV level of the same event in the House of Representatives, and I wonder who one of those students might be. And their season ends at the end of this month, and I believe all of the students are hoping to earn some spots in the Nationals if possible, if they get that far. So that's great. Congratulations to those students. If you came in on the day before the break and went over to the middle school, many of our middle school staff members were in the lobby at the beginning of the day, grades 4 through 8, singing carols, and we had students and there'll be a picture on my blog tomorrow of all the students in the middle school watching their teachers and staff singing Christmas carols to them. So it was fun to kind of see their faces to do that. Mrs. Train and Mrs. Flewitt's first grade classes right before the break made a miniature town of Cumberland with all kinds of landmarks using gingerbread house creations. And it is amazing. And again, I will have photos of this on my blog tomorrow, but you can actually pick out, you can look at these gingerbread houses that the students made in their study of community and actually see the landmarks and tell. Even the fire station looks like the new fire station and not the old fire station. So pretty amazing, and it ties to their curricular study of their local community. Grades 4 through 5 decorated the doors, which they do each year, and they had a contest to see which winter theme came out, and I'll have a picture of Mrs. Cosker's door decorating on my blog tomorrow. They managed to insert me into a snowball fight, so I thought that was kind of interesting to highlight. We've had some questions in the last week or so around how we handle furniture that's being disposed of. One of the good things I think that we have been doing recently through the budget process with the support of the board is that we've developed a capital plan to replace furniture in our district. Our schools, some of our schools have very old furniture, including the high school right now, which is where our main focus is on replacing furniture. The students are using currently desks and chairs that are those metal one-piecers that we went to school with. I remember sitting in those where the bolts are half out. And we've had these desks and chairs at the high school for 20 to 30, some people have told me longer than that, years. And we are in the process of finding new homes for those desks and chairs, so to speak, and moving towards more modern 21st century learning where there are opportunities for students to move around a room, have desks on wheels, have chairs and desks that are not stationary. And in order to do so, we also have a policy that allows us to donate furniture that we're not using to other school districts, and even to sell it. And we do that on a regular basis when we have furniture in our district that is no longer of service to us, but might be of service to someone else. And we try to do that as much as possible. In those instances where other districts are not interested in our furniture, and I can tell you right now that most districts are in the same spot we're at. They're trying to get rid of 30 and 40-year-old desks and chair metal combinations. Then we dispose of furniture, and we do that on an annual basis. And we have a policy that provides for us to do that. And when we dispose of furniture such as desks and chairs, which we did last week, we make sure that we are recycling the metal and steel when we are able to do that. The money that comes back to the district, we actually receive money back for that, for the recycling, and that goes back to our general fund in the form of a revenue. So those are the ways that we dispose of furniture in our district. And I know I've had a couple inquiries in the last week or so about that process, so I wanted to make that public. And I'd like to thank a couple people for helping us to open school on time this morning in minus 24-degree weather. At one point, we had minus 24. And I'd like to thank Don Foster, who is our facilities supervisor, and his crew for checking continuously the heat in our buildings over the last few days as we had cold temperatures, making sure that our pipes weren't freezing and monitoring those on a regular basis. And Phil Blake, who is the transportation supervisor, and his crew for coming in for the last couple days and starting the buses, so they're not just starting after a one-week hiatus. And because of those things, we really had no issues in opening school on time. And I'd like to thank Mr. Poulin, sitting next to me, for making sure all of that gets done and making sure that we don't have some of the struggles that other school districts this morning had. So thank you to our staff for that. And finally, my report, and in my blog tomorrow, if you're so interested, is my latest proficiency primer. I won't read this one tonight, but it is about supporting students who need extra or extended help as they are working through a proficiency-based education.
Thank you. And I want to echo to Scott and the whole facilities team for opening up the schools on time, break. So it was another smooth start. And so I think I speak for all of us that we're really appreciative of that, especially given the very cold temps.
It was quite a down temperature. So
Yeah, yeah, and
it's
it looks.
really, I mean, we've got some really dedicated people that work for us, so we really appreciate all that they do.
Yeah,
So
it's hard getting out there when it's dark and cold like it is, and apparently we're looking out to have a little bit more coming our way. So, but thank you very much, and thanks for the report. Let's go ahead and I don't think there's any public comment tonight. Okay. I'm just going to tick through the committee reports just as they appear in the agenda. So Karen, finance, please.
We had a joint finance and facilities, so Mike and I can cover it, and then you might have more to add on facilities. But we covered 3 items this morning: the Greeley Center for the Arts, a financial update, and the good news from a financial side is it's on budget, and from a facility side, Mike?
On schedule.
No, on schedule and on budget. The Greeley Center for the Arts, we went through the actual schedule update, so I think that those 2 items we ticked off pretty quickly. And then we took Steve Blatt joined us this morning and gave us sort of a high-level summary of where he's at with the district-wide space study. So it was a district-wide space study update, and I know he'll be sharing that with the full board. But the gist of it all is that, from a high level, that he's gone through, and then I'm going to turn it to Mike in like 2 seconds. He's gone through the facilities with the exception of Mabel. He's finishing up with Mabel I. Wilson and really looked at what are the actual spaces here and how are they being utilized, and then what the thoughts of the staff and administration are as to further uses. Do you want to add to that?
Well, I don't want to jump.
No,
order
I was
here.
just commenting that I think I'm going to let you 2 collaborate, and little segue. I'm going to go out of line because it appears needs
that
must.
is a very nice segue. It was our much anticipated joint facilities finance meeting this morning, or finance facilities. I guess since Karen did the minutes, she can list her group first. It was great to get together. Absolutely want to echo what Jeff and Gigi already mentioned, to Scott, Don, and Phil, and all the work that goes in behind the scenes to kind of make this happen during a bitterly cold downstretch. Large campus, large fleet. The fact that we're standing on this side of it with an open school and a warm library is pretty remarkable. So keep up the good work. Yeah, and thank you especially to Karen for going first. I was able to scribble out my notes. I had called it the PAC, but it is the Greeley Center for the Arts, and I will practice and try to do better on that in February. Those who came in before the sun went down, around noon today, you may have noticed some of the structural steel went up, and received indications from the architect that there will be conversations looming on the imminent horizon as it relates to finish and color selections and carpeting and seat colors. So it's pretty exciting at how quickly this is progressing. And as Karen alluded to, Steve Black came in, gave us sort of a holistic view of our campus, space needs, current use, and highest best use. And just trying to brainstorm ways to accommodate things that loom on the horizon with both enrollment, but also some of the things that sit out there related to pre-K. And I believe that we, as a finance and facilities committees, we will have ongoing conversations, and those will include the board.
Great. Good.
Finance's meeting, our next meeting is on the 16th of this month, And we'll be meeting with the North Yarmouth Select Board Chair and the Budget Committee. And that's the second of our 2 meetings that we've already met with the town council members and their finance committee. So just, again, those discussions are to talk about both of our budgets' priorities. So from a high level, just what's on the horizon in terms of for North Yarmouth that they can see that are potentially big ticket items, and what's on the horizon for the school system, so that we can have meaningful conversations about that prior as we both build our budgets.
Yeah, I mean, those discussions have been going on for years, and we're really excited to be looping North Yarmouth into this during this process. And I think you guys having the forethought of doing it earlier in the process so it syncs up well before we're too far down the budget roads. I think it's always important just to have face-to-face meetings, and so I'm very excited about moving forward on the 16th.
Yeah, I think this is our 4th year of
This is our
meeting
4th year, and then
So it's
yeah,
been
both
helpful.
towns will be great. So,
Yep.
well, good. Then I think what I'll do next is bounce over. Does anyone have any questions for finance or facilities? So then let's go ahead and go forward with policy, if that's okay.
Sure. So policy met this evening. We typically meet before each school board meeting, and we are going to adjust our sales a little bit for the rest of the year. We've, as you can see, kind of hit it pretty hard. We've had some large groups of policies that we really needed to get through, and I think now we're at a good point where you're going to start to see a lot fewer policies on your agenda, so we can really take some time, digest them. And so we will only be meeting once per month. Our next meeting is February 5th.
Yep.
I believe so. Don't quote me on that. And so we have 4 policies for first reads. These will be broken up into 2 groups for their second readings. And if you have any questions on them after you read them, you can contact me over the next almost month. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Any questions for Kate? And let's move on. Curriculum. Vicki, Karen, anyone? want to
Sure.
report?
So myself, Karen, and Tyler had the opportunity, to speak with Sally Laughlin and Julie Olson to go over non-categorical supports, going with the jargon again. And what we decided that really means is how we support our students on sort of the ground level, with the classroom teachers and progress up to different opportunities for students. So that was a very fruitful and educational meeting for the board members. And they're doing lots of good work, and we'll see how it gets eventually rolled out, but just it's good to have an understanding of sort of how we're approaching these things now.
Great. Any other comments on curriculum? Thank you, Vicki.
You're
I
welcome.
appreciate it. Thank you, Karen. Negotiations, anything?
Nothing at this time.
Okay, great. We've covered facilities. Kevin, with strategic planning?
We have not had a meeting since the last one.
Okay.
The effort to wordsmith that survey for distribution is ongoing and should conclude. Jeff, do you have the date of the next session? I thought it was the 16th, but
I don't think we have a meeting till February, because the survey, if I remember, goes out late January,
It does.
3rd week of January.
Yep.
Good. Yeah, well, that's a big undertaking, that survey, and I know, you've really laid out very well for us all the sort of reservoirs of information coming in. So we look forward to that. Will the board be having a chance to look at that survey before it goes out?
yes, and Karen has slipped me a electronic note that it is February 12th is our next.
Okay, super.
She's just working the table today.
I know. So the board will take a look at that survey beforehand? Great, thank you very much. Tyler was unable to come tonight, environmental stewardship. I don't know if there's anyone who can weigh in on that, or we can wait until next term to have that report, and also no student reports. We very diligently, both our student reps wrote, and they have both academic and some athletic demands, which wisely took precedent. So we're good there. Then any other questions or comments on committees? I'll just, with respect to communications, January 16th, we'll have a mid-year retreat. At this point, we're still penciling out what we're going to be covering. I think because of, we might do a high-level discussion of budget process as we're beginning to embark where we're at with the budget, make sure everyone's on the same page on that. Kevin, maybe some more overview on strategic plan, just where we're at with that, some high-level discussion of space study. How long that retreat will be, I think, is going to dictate on what kind of content. Oh, and we'll also obviously take a look at pull up our goals, see where we're going with that. I'll get back to you guys in terms of the duration of that meeting. I'm hoping to make it shorter, if possible, but okay, so then so it might just gotten really short. And so, so we'll take it from there. So the next meeting, again, will be a mid-year retreat. Stay tuned for some agenda items. If there is something that you are dying to talk about at the retreat, let me know, and then we'll circle back with respect to the timing on that meeting. So turning next to, the other thing with communications, and if I could just have a moment of leave, it sort of springboards. Communication is changing so much now, and a lot of people do use social media, and with respect to whether it's town or school and obviously some of us, we are all community members. We pick up on that. It is difficult for us sometimes to respond, certainly in real time, to social media concerns, because there are some FOIA issues and the like. So although we encourage, obviously, any sort of dialoguing out there, and we support that. I wanted to make sure that the public who watch understand that, and understand that we encourage you really to reach out to central office and any of your board members who you may feel comfortable with, because it is difficult for us to have open conversations and be able to get as fulsome facts out there if we learn through now social media and the like. And so please, although it might be not necessarily that's something that people do in terms of reaching out to school board members or emails, our communication is on the website, our board contact is, and I think all of us, what we don't know, what we don't hear, we don't know. And so please reach out to us. Obviously, if it goes and that information can be passed on and disseminated, but I think all of us really encourage and welcome comments, and so please try to give us a call or email us, or obviously central office, because we do welcome that feedback, and town feedback and citizen input is very important to us, and we hear it and we listen to it. And one of the things I can say in serving has been always really just so impressive is the degree to which even any comments that we hear, how we try to track down and get the relevant information. I mean, that has always been really striking to me, that one voice gets some prompt attention. So with that, thank you for indulging me with that. Let's turn to items for action, and that would be you, Kate.
Yes, so we have a lot of policies, and they are really, really important policies. I would like to put in the caveat, though, is while these seem like really, really important policies that have huge ramifications, they're shaped largely by our legal counsel. These are not policies that we could change a lot of the language in. They're not policies that I even feel as policy chair that I can have a huge opinion on, because so much of this comes directly from legal. So I know it feels incredibly overwhelming to have this many policies. Out of all these policies, I think maybe one or two sentences was changed from what was recommended. So again, it's a lot in number, but it's really not a lot of changes to necessarily digest. So we can start with policy ACAA. So I'll make a motion, then we can have any conversation after the motion.
Great approach.
So I move to approve policy ACAA, harassment and sexual harassment of students, as recommended.
Is there a second? Vicki, is there any discussion?
I just want to point out, to Kate's point, for the public, this is a policy that was revised as recently as 2014, and the changes that are made to it are minor. So I know this is one that we've had significant discussions on in the past because the changes were a lot more, they just were larger in number. So
Thank you, Karen.
I'm comfortable voting on this one tonight as written because it really is a small amendment.
Any other thoughts on that? Yeah, it seems to me that what we're doing is adding in some definitions that are under state law anyhow, and just some
Updating cross-references.
updating the methods of conduct and communication. So, are there any thoughts on this? Then I'm going to go ahead and move to a vote. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Okay, so that one passes. Kate, would you like to queue up the next one?
Sure. I move to approve policy IHBA, individualized education programs, as recommended.
Second?
Second.
Any comments?
It just, again, I think this only change we're asking is the effective date being moved to the beginning of the school year for the IEPs to be, completed, or to be in effect. So, it's, actually, I'm wondering why that wasn't even in there in the first place. It just wasn't changed? It didn't identify a start date? Yeah, that's interesting. It's an update. Okay.
Anyone else have any thoughts on this? Are you ready to move to a vote? Okay, all in favor? Anyone opposed? Thank you. Next.
So I move to approve policy IBAC, child find, as recommended.
A second?
Second.
Any discussion? Again, looks to me that we are, this was adopted in 2013, we're just deleting a paragraph.
Yep, and this is actually in conjunction with a policy that we saw last spring that updated our private or public tuition policy. So this is really aligning our policy to our practice.
Any, all in favor? No one opposed? All right, the next one?
And this policy is simply just to update the legal references and cross-referencing, no policy changes otherwise. So I move to approve policy IHBAF, IEP, team meeting attendance, as recommended.
Second.
All in, any discussion? All in favor? Anyone opposed? Nope.
Sure. So I'm going to recommend that we approve policy IHBAI, independent educational evaluations, as recommended.
Second.
Any discussion?
I just have to say that I think it's amazing, having served on policy before, that we're down to the point of we're actually tweaking policies to make sure that our cross-reference, in this case, we actually have the cross-reference, we're just changing it to update the
I
plan.
don't think it's the same one as me.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're not on
We are now on-
JKAA?
No, I think we just.
Oh, I skipped
I
one.
think we just,
Because
yeah.
I'm like, this one.
IHBA.
We're on now IHBA
Okay.
AI.
Well,
I
this
mean,
one
and-
I actually needs more. I do. This is the one I'm like,
I was gonna say,
okay.
okay, well, this one might have a little
No,
bit
no,
more
this one,
changes than that.
it's
like, all right.
Mike's nudging me as I'm talking, like, you got the wrong policy.
I know, and I'm over here, I'm like, is she on the right one?
I put them out of order, because yes, this one I do need.
Yeah. Do you want to give
Do need to update
give a
some.
little, some insight into this? And the reason why I do that is that, this has been, what appears to be almost a complete
Yeah, it's a
replacement of
complete
text.
replacement.
So Kate, would you like to just give us
Sure.
an overview on that?
Yeah, so basically, we found that our current policy, I mean, while it was more than adequate, we needed to update. We needed to put in more information and really bring it up to date with the sample that Drummond and Woodson was recommending. So it looks like a lot of change, but if you do cross-reference into the struck-out text, it is more or less the same, but just with more detail. So it looks like a large change, but it's really just a tweak and an up-to-date language update.
And so again, this is special education independent
Yes.
evaluations. Karen, did you have comment on this?
Actually, I do. I was gonna make Mike make it. The name of the school unit and the second paragraph should actually, before we approve it,
Yep.
should be MSAD 51.
Thanks, Mike and Karen.
I was here.
Mike, I know that you're the one who's saying things.
She means Simmons.
That means I can call on you, Mike.
However, it's just, I can't speak again, Mike. You have
Yeah. Anything else on that? Are there any other discussion? All in favor? Any seconds? I mean, who was the second? I'm sorry. It was Vicky. Right? Yes. Okay, good. The next one?
All right, and this is, I believe, the one you were talking about, Karen, that is simply just we updated our crisis response plan, updated to comprehensive emergency management. We needed to list that in the cross-references, so it's just a cross-reference update. So I move that we approve policy JKAA, use of physical restraint and seclusion, as recommended.
Second.
Is there any discussion on this?
I already made my
I think we can remember those and incorporate them here.
edit the tape, and insert the right spot.
All in favor? No one opposed. The next one?
All right, so the next policy, again, is we just added cross-references in. They didn't exist in the 2000 edition of this policy, so we added those in, and then also the legal references changed with the main special education chapter. So I move that we approve policy JKF.
Second. I'm sorry.
That's right.
I was like right on it.
I like it, Vicki, as recommended.
Okay. Any other discussion? All in favor? No one opposed? And I believe what is the last for this evening?
Yes, so the last policy, this was a policy, this change was recommended to us several times very strongly by an attorney at Drummond and Woodsum. And so I move that we approve policy JRA, Student Education Records and Information, also known as FERPA, as recommended.
Second.
Discussion?
I guess I was wondering, why did they recommend this? I guess just curious, I know it's
That last sentence.
At Drummond and Woods, this is actually a national trend that's been
Yeah.
started, and so nationally we've been paying attention to legal pieces around our practice here in our district, which has been long-standing, that we report any disciplinary incidents on college applications through the guidance office at our high school. So a college would have that information if a student was suspended or whatnot. And our legal counsel very strongly recommended that for liability purposes and, just for supporting student purposes, that we have a practice in our district through policy that says we do not report disciplinary incidents on college applications through our school office. That if a student wants to go ahead and disclose that, that's up to them and their family, but it's not up to the school to be doing that. And so by doing this, the board is approving a blanket statement saying we just don't report disciplinary incidents on college applications.
If I could ask a question, I understand it from a liability standpoint if we do report, but do we also have one if we do not report?
I asked that question of Drummond and Woodson when we were discussing this. And this was something, by the way, that went back and forth for months between the high school. We had conversations at the high school. We talked to legal counsel probably 3 different occasions about this particular one statement that we're adding. And they said that the liability of reporting something like this was far greater than the liability of not reporting it. And that if you have a blanket statement that you're not reporting on any student, that's your policy, it really minimizes your liability. And that it really isn't our job to be doing that. That's, for disclosure purposes on a college application, that's up to the applicant and not up to the school to be providing that information. And it goes well above and beyond what a school is expected to do. So we're actually providing more information that we really needed, that we didn't need to be providing.
Thanks for clarifying.
Yep.
Thank you, Kevin. Anyone else? All in favor? And no one opposed? Okay. So at this juncture, we're going to enter into executive session to review and discuss confidential records pursuant to state statute 1 MRSA section 4056F. And I probably should have, so, I probably just read the motion. But would someone like to make a motion to go into executive session, please?
I move,
Volume mic.
I move that we enter executive session to review and discuss confidential records pursuant to State Statute 1 MRSA, Section 405-6F.
Great. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Great, okay. We're off until we come back? All right.
Good, so.
We have to.
I think it's okay to say yes, I want to
You're
support
good.
you in this.
At this time, could I take a motion to come out of executive session, please?
Madam Chairwoman, I move that we come out of executive session.
May I have
Second.
Okay, all in favor? And then could I follow up with a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Second?
Second.
Wise guy. All in favor? Okay, we're out. We're done. Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.